Thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciated Tim's approach last Wednesday or 2 Wednesdays ago, where he just would interject and ask a question. That's the way to do it. Feel free to stop me, but I also will pause once or twice for a key question or two. So there will be some rest stops along the way. But we've got a big, tall order tonight. We got to finish the 10 Commandments, and my promise to you is that I will try to bridge into their relevance for the current cultural moment that we're facing, and why they still matter and what they might say for us. So hold on to your hats, and let's finish up the 10 commands, and then we'll get to the contemporary upshot. We left off in command 8, which is around question 331, if you are moving through your handy dandy catechism with us. And I'm really just going to make a couple comments on commands 8, 9, and 10, words 8, 9, and 10, and then I will make the segue. Stealing, helpfully, is defined as the willful taking of what rightly belongs to others in question 331. Pretty basic. I love how basic God's morality for us is. This is the kind of stuff that I'm already working on with Wes in his 13th month, taking things from his siblings. But you get worked out of this command in the Old Testament vision, a really beautiful understanding of property and the respect of things that belong to others and the restitution that's involved in making right the wrongs with stealing. And so there's a nice kind of biblical understanding of property, which is not just about private property protection, as we kind of think of it after the Enlightenment, but also was about protecting the property of the poor and the oppressed, and not offering unjust loans on the basis of people's property. So there's a pretty cool biblical economics in the Old Testament. And of course, Jesus brings that biblical economics home to the heart and invites us to think not just about stealing people's possessions, but about the infection of greed in the heart, the disordered desire to want too much. And as we'll get to command 10 with covetousness, wanting what is not ours. And of course, Jesus moves us beyond stealing and greed to the positive biblical vision of generosity. The very heart of the biblical vision of morality is a sense of justice, which is tethered to generosity. And I think that it's important to note that in question 338, that it gets really practical in terms of what that means for us, giving to the church or tithing potentially as a principle, and giving to the poor, and pressing the limits of our generosity. Not just as a way of testing the greedy affections of the heart, but benefiting those in need. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of the upshot. Anybody have any questions or things as they were working through the do not steal command 8, things that we found puzzling or wanted to highlight? No need to, but just didn't want to pass by anything. Good. This is the right kind of class. You just keep going. Question, command 9. Now, do stop me if something comes to mind. But command 9, false witness. We talked about this actually a bit last session, because there's really a strong emphasis on the communication and miscommunication with words that betray reality through falsehoods. And it says in question 340, bearing false witness actually is the willful communication of falsehood about a neighbor. So that's the ultra expression of bearing false witness. And of course, that's a really peculiar and particular kind of injustice and domination of someone, to betray them with your words, to speak falsely or miscommunicate something about them in a way that harms them, but also erodes the truth of the community. And it's in that really powerful mesh that we talked about of the God who speaks creation, speaks his will through the 10 words, And in that speaking God, he sets up a whole system of political morality, which is tethered to the rightness of speech, using speech in words to accurately represent reality, the reality of what we find ourselves in relationship with one another in this case, or through education, the right depiction of reality through speech. So our God is a truthful God because he's a word God, and it's in this fabric of using the tongue for its purpose. Among its many purposes, one of them is to form utter sounds that are intelligible in the form of words that convey truth about reality and about others. And it's in that there is a form of trust, and there's a form of covenant that allows the community to flourish. And so the ultimate expressions of this kind of truthful, life-giving speech are those pronouncements that we think of with the consecration of the Eucharist, or the vows that people make in their marriage, or the baptismal vows we say back to God in reciting the creed and expressing our faith. There's this grand sense of word based community at the heart of the Christian faith and at the Ten Commandments. And it makes me most worried when you hear things like we live in a post-truth era. That should give you great concern, not just about science or factoids on the internet, but about the very fabric of trust that makes community life possible. And I've seen more, again, I know this is totally anecdotal, but I've had so many more academic dishonesty cases this past year. And I don't know exactly, it might've been the classes I was teaching, but students who come and they, copied their neighbor's work, or they just copied something off the internet, put it in their paper and turned it in. And then in my happy job as a dean, I have to meet with these students and ask them, did you know you were cheating and this is wrong or whatever? And the answer often is, I don't feel like I was cheating. And that puts you in a difficult position. I'm not interested in testing the authenticity of your feelings. I'm just interested in whether or not this is a kind of stealing of intellectual property or bearing false witness. So yeah, I think that you can kind of feel the creeping effects of moving away from a kind of morality of words or speech, if that makes sense.
What do they feel? I mean, that's what I would want to know. What,
yeah.
Supplementing their paper, or borrowing, or or do they even think about it? I don't know.
No, that's a great question. I think they all have different descriptions that all hinge on a kind of squishiness around this idea of words being your own, or accurately representing your own work to the world. But yeah, it's a great question. Squishy answers. Sean.
So I just find it so helpful when you talk about the coherence of a community, and that truth-telling and bearing false witness, there's kind of that end in mind, like a community that is coherently functional. When you tease out the implications of what you see with these young students, and the greater sense of what the implications are for this moment, what are the connections you're making about kind of what then is the impact of this breakdown of truth-telling for our moment, and what are some of the motivations? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think part of it is I don't know, and I'd be very open to others chiming in on that. It's a mega question. I think we're still trying to figure out what the root sources of this shift are. The irony is that we live in the most word-saturated culture in the history of humankind. Our lives are just textually awash, filled with communication, with speech, with intake of words. And I think that part of it is is wrapped up in the kind of disintegration of communities that are formed by coherent speech. So I think to your point, you know, Wendell Berry's got this great essay called Standing by Words. It's like an 80-page essay, but his whole notion is that speech, the way we learn language, of course, as children, and then we come to express ourselves through it and navigate the world through it, is based in this network of relationships that make our lives intelligible and sustainable, and sometimes horrific, but sometimes beautiful. And it's in those communities of, like, their colloquial communities, their word-based, their dialogue, their speech-based communities, that you learn to hold each other accountable for the things that you say. And so I think the challenge is, have we lost a kind of integration at the level of the small little concentric circle communities in which we find ourselves presenting ourselves with words and holding each other accountable to the words that we've spoken. So a great line, one of my favorite lines in the Bible, Ephesians, is Paul's claim that we have to speak the truth in love, which I think he's identifying the challenge of what it means to live in one of those word-based communities where you hold each other accountable and you have to say things that you don't actually really want to say or could come across in the wrong way. And so there's a sense of using words to convey truth and love. But, you know, there's a whole element of, like, relational trust that has to be built up around it. And it's one of the challenges I feel right now in our era of electronic church. You feel like increasingly, you know, the strain of, I'm gonna Zoom with Keith tomorrow and you know, sort of call him on some of his secret sins that I know about through Zoom or whatever. It's like, oh, I don't plan on doing that. I don't think Keith has any secret sins, but if he did, I'd be really hard pressed to want to talk to him by Zoom about them. And so there's this almost like excarnation that's going on in the way we communicate right now. And I think texting, again, you forget these patterns of communication have deep impacts on your own formation. Anyways, I evaded an answer, but those are some thoughts.
Joe?
Tim?
I think I think that was a great response, and it's a great question. To me, it's a fundamental question that comes back to the question, who has the authority to determine what a word means?
Yeah.
And I think about the human predicament as our having a fundamental problem that comes from Genesis 3, that I want to be God. And therefore, I have the authority. And it's incontestable from a certain point of view. What I think is right or accurate is what is right or accurate, because that's my take on it. And and I have the authority to say, and I hope I'm not oversimplifying this, but you know, I have the authority to say what is right and what is wrong for me in my situation. And
yeah.
And you're overstepping your bound if you contest that. And sometimes I think, and I don't know, but sometimes I think it's not more complicated. I see that in my own life. You know, the things I give myself permission to do.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, Tim. I think part of the secret kind of arrogance of the human condition is we want to be like God and speak things into reality. You think of God being able to say, "Let there be light," and there was light. That's the ultimate power. So when I say, "Alexa, order me, you know, some donuts," or whatever, it's like I get to ape, you know, it's a similitude of this divine kind of power of command. And of course, that's always been true of like a dictator, literally a dictator, right? As a ruler with supreme sole authority. So you have, I think you get this sense that postmodern relativism is really strong, and it has everything to do with the way we describe things, the words we use, right? So even the fact that, I mean, this is not to say anything about, I mean, it is to say something, but it would be a longer conversation about the morality of all these things. But the fact that people can use words to identify as things that they don't physiologically appear as, you know, I identify as a different race than the way I appear, I identify as a different gender. This is a very complex question, obviously, but you get the sense that we believe that the world is malleable and pliable to a certain degree, and it's our descriptions of things that are the truth. And yet, as a culture, we bump against reality when it comes to the description of things like the killing of George Floyd, right? So the hottest question on the social media feeds right now is, what was that killing? Was it a murder? So is it falling under command 6, do not murder? And of course, the command there, the catechism was clear that a murder is a special species of killing. It's an unjust form of killing, of which there might be a just form of killing in war, capital punishment potentially. But if it's an unjust killing, it's a murder. And is that what went on? Or was it a lynching, right? There's even like deeper cultural associations with what that kind of public execution might amount to. So again, everything depends upon description. And I think we're all open to a plurality of descriptions and meanings until it comes down to things that we all, you know, in the heart of hearts understand to be core to reality, to good, to evil, to God. You know, as Paul says, the Decalogue in some mysterious way was imprinted in the human heart through the conscience, even if we have turned away from that conscience through time. So anyways, I think that's right. That's a great observation.
I think it's very important to listen as well. We have lost the meaning of words. And I always go back to Dorothy Sayers, who said, you know, when a culture has lost its language, it's lost everything. And it's interesting to me, I was a copywriter, and you addressed advertising copy to a 3rd grade reading mentality. That was the rule of thumb. But what I find really interesting with all this stuff, first of all, is try to listen to the word somebody's using and then question them and challenge it. I've really noticed lately with abortion, which, you know, the long ongoing debate about abortion. But the big thing is like Planned Parenthood never uses the word baby. It's absolute taboo. Everything is always a fetus, okay? If you know someone who's had a miscarriage, what word do they use? Somebody who wanted that baby. And I think sometimes you have to awake somebody to what they're using a word and how they're excluding things simply by, in that way, a fetus is sort of impersonal as opposed to a baby. That's just one example. And I think as Christians too, we have to be really careful of trendy things like it's all good. Well, what does that mean? You know, or no worries, you know. And I said to somebody, really, it's all good? Have you been to India lately? I mean, you know, that, but I also one time had to return something that something was wrong with it. So I lug it in there, and the girl says, no problem. I said, well, it is for me. I mean, I don't do it, it's not, but I just try to, let's think about what we're saying. Like was one of the worst words in the transition, because everybody was saying, it's like this. It's like, well, you never had to make up your mind about anything. Because as long as you put that word like in front of it, you were uncommitted. So I think that in those examples, I love language. I wish I could remember words better than I do, but it is amazing to me. And we have, people have used the least amount of words than ever before. I mean, most people's vocabulary is very limited. So I guess what I'm saying is, as Christians, I mean, I think we have to really listen to see how they're using those words and then come up with a creative way to, I don't know if the word challenge is exactly what I'm looking for, but to get an explanation of what it is they're saying, because you can really hide behind slogans and all other kinds of things. I don't see how you can have truth if you don't have God. Then everything's relative. And,
that's well said. Bill?
I think part of the cultural sort of background for any discussion of truth is that we live in a very wised up, the phrase I use, a very wised up age, as in some centuries of a phrase that historians use is the masters of suspicion, Marx, Nietzsche, Freud. I mean, we've had a couple centuries now of people trying to tear away the hidden agenda in our language. And so we are almost reflexively, automatically suspicious of what's the hidden agenda in this claim. You know, is this a sneaky way of males trying to perpetuate their hegemony on the human race or something or other? And so ideology is lurking in the background all the time. I think that colors how truthful we can be if we are defending a certain embattled point of view, or if we are suspicious of a certain point of view. That, in a sense, that's part of that larger language community you're talking about. If it's a culture that's fundamentally mistrusting or suspicious of the hidden agenda going on here, that's going to complicate any truth claims, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. We're in the deep philosophical waters, unsurprisingly. This catechism group, man, it's intense. I love it. I think that's exactly right. We live in an age that thinks, you know, with Nietzsche, as you say, Bill, that truth is just a mobile army of metaphors, as he says, that we use to dominate other people. Whereas the vision of speech you get from the Bible, from the speaking God, is that it discloses reality, the reality of the human heart, human experience, nature. Education is actually at the center of this debate, because the point of education is that we have set rules, grammar usually when you come to the language side of education, and people play by those rules as a way of not just conveying truth, but relying on each other. So if I say something's $10, you know what $10 means. It wasn't $10 in my private world. It was the $10 I'm going to give you. There's a kind of shared structure. And I think that you have increasingly a lost sense of that logos, that logic kind of at the heart of reality, the order of things that we're trying to map with words as human beings. And when you don't have that, education becomes a very, subjective, private affair. But that I think is exactly right. This ties really well into command 10, covetousness, which we glanced at kind of through a comment last time. And I think that this speaks to the kind of interior dimension of the commands. That is the disordered affections, the greedy heart, the grasping soul that's not content. And I think Steve Clausen said it so well last time, that at the heart of the commands is this sense of drawing contentment in God that frees you from the need to steal or to covet or to mix your words up to get your way. It actually allows you to be satiated and lets your soul rest in a way. And in question 356, at the end there of the 10th commandment, it says, how do you keep the command to not covet? It says, I keep it by learning contentment, seeking first the kingdom of God, meditating on God's provision in creation and in my life, cultivating gratitude for what I have and simplicity in what I want, and practicing joyful generosity toward others. And that seems to sum up the kind of spirituality of the commands, especially the 10th commandment, this kind of singularity of purpose and love for God that liberates you from the many wants and needs and never-ending angles of desire that lead you to do things like lying or stealing or sleeping around or go down the list. And so, covetousness, I think a generation ago, keeping up with the Joneses very much had to do with the size of your yard or your swimming pool or your suburban or whatever. But I think now covetousness is almost like a lifestyle covetousness that is an add-on to that of, I'm just aware of all these other lives that people can be living as they're streamed into my reality through digital life and social media. And there's a kind of secret discontent that I think a lot of us nurture for someone else's life. And might be partly just the stage of life I'm in, but I think there's endless layers to the way in which covetousness can kind of afflict the soul, and the cure is contentment, it says there in question 356, which I thought was great. Any flourishes on that?
Dr. Joe, do you think that do you see any ways in which we fall into this trap of coveting what others have? That, how good we are at spiritualizing sin, and do you see any obvious pitfalls that we need to avoid in, whether it's, lying or stealing or coveting, where we can do self-checks? Am I making any sense?
Yep.
I guess I'm just wondering, I want to positively obey and then avoid the pitfalls.
Yeah. Now it's a great, I don't know. I'd love if anyone else wants to chime in, feel free. I do think there's a kind of ingratitude at the heart of most of my sins. And if COVID quarantine has taught me anything, it's a kind of assessment of the gifts that are right around me that I ignore or overlook. I'm too busy for, or find to be too boring or too arduous or something like that. And I think, a lot of people, obviously has been a tremendously challenging time for a lot of people. It also has been a time of fasting as feasting, as Sean has said multiple times through Bishop Todd, which I think is so genius, is that the deprivation from certain things highlights what is there and the gift of what is there. And I think it's that ingratitude, it's that discontent, which is the root of so many other sins that you're set in motion of grasping after all these things. And of course, I think at the heart of it is actually command number 2, this claim about idolatry, this misalignment of desire is not just a matter of like not being content with one scoop of ice cream or whatever, but it's actually this like endless striving to find the deep soul satisfaction in things that can't deliver. It doesn't mean they're not great in their proper use and place and order, but it means actually that you tend to abuse those things when you look to them to be more satisfying or more fulfilling than they are. And so seek first the kingdom of God, that kind of resounding love the Lord your God with everything that you have, is this kind of like profound liberation from the grasping hand, the many, the needs and the wants that preoccupy us. I mean, what could be worse than the craving mind always thinking about what's next, and dissatisfied with that which is? It's just the ultimate affliction,
How did Dante describe that? But
How does Dante?
yeah, how did he describe that craving? A can't remember. I haven't read the whole, I want to, but I have read some of the descriptions of people, and I can't remember. I'm trying to think what the thing for craving.
Katie Lang had a
I
great.
don't know. He.
I know one of them
Oh,
was
Kathleen,
spoon
go.
with that never gets to your mouth. You know, the spoon is
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't
yeah.
most
Everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody who hasn't read the Inferno, one of the kind of glorious imaginative visions is all these people in hell, which is not super fun thing to think about, but they're in this cycle of dissatisfaction with whatever their kind of primary sins were in this life. And so it's this kind of endless pursuit of the thing which can't satisfy. And of course they can't actually get it. So my favorite one is Paolo and Francesca, the adulterers, who are chasing each other around in this kind of, foray into a tryst, but they can't ever like get a hold of each other. And yeah, it's kind of funny, kind of terrifying.
Okay, so speaking of Dante, did you post something about Seven Story Mountain by Thomas Merton that we ought to read that?
John, I think, put it on the spiritual autobiography list. Is that right?
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just read that book, and of course the 7 stories are the 7 stories of purgatory in Dante's Inferno or Paradiso. Yeah. And here I am.
Now you got to keep going back, go back into Dante.
I wish
Well, let
somebody
me,
did a course on Dante. I would love to read that with people, so I'd be able to get through it. Anyway.
I know this group makes me think we should do a ongoing adult learning version of the honors program at George Fox. We'll just keep cruising.
Amen. Amen.
But isn't some of what we're talking about always get back to the individual? All the things that are going on right now, the politics, the protest, on and on and on. It's all about generalizations, name calling, and blaming someone else and never ever looking at yourself, which is basically the basis of salvation, is coming before God and realizing who you are. And I think, for instance, I know myself, whenever I've gossiped or made comments about people, it's because I'm trying to bring someone else down thinking it's going to lift me up. I may not consciously think, but that's basically what I'm doing. And I think that what you said earlier about the idea when we are in relationship, when we are, contemplating, and it's impossible, at least I find it impossible to do it all the time, but it isn't like we have to say, I'm going to stop gossiping. It's like you don't have the need to gossip. Oh, does that make sense? And I think,
Yep.
I don't know that there's any solutions for what's going on right now, but if there's a way to always get people to get back to, there but for the grace of God. I mean, that we are all individually sinners. We have, in different ways that we have our problems manifest themselves in different ways. And I think that maybe that's something that's happening in our culture anyway, as we follow trends. We seem to have, I remember when following a trend was an insult. Now it's, there's all this kind of move, you don't do things individually, in the sense that, it used to be that was the big American thing, is we were supposedly all too individualistic, but that seems to be gone.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I mean, this is, so on the one hand, I think some of the excesses of the response of what we're seeing right now could be troubling and problematic in their own right. On the other hand, you have a really ripe cultural moment where you have a shared outrage or protest about a very fundamental injustice, kind of at the heart of the world, about unjust killing, let's say, murder, potentially. That's one of the commandments. So this is, of all of all the things, in this age of hyper individualism and kind of imagined realities and postmodern relativism, you have a shared cultural sense that the domination of the weak or unjust killing, violence of a certain kind is wrong. It's a sin against the universe. You get the sense, and of course, for those who understand the words, the 10 words, and God's law given here, it's no surprise. It's a fundamental affront against the image bearingness, the dignity, the beauty of human beings. You don't do that to human beings. You might be able to do it to deer, but you don't do it to human beings, right? And you get into this, we're touching the moral nerve that's still there. And of course, if you've ever been to the Supreme Court, among the many sort of figures up there in the frieze above the court, the very center is Moses holding the 2 tablets of the Decalogue. That's still at the heart of the cultural imagination of the West, even if people aren't doing catechism and memorizing the 10 Commandments anymore. So I think we have this moment. And to your point, I think you're right, Joan. There's a sense that social criticism is still very alive in certain variations, but the connection between self and social criticism is hard for people to make. And I think that if the Decalogue, if the 10 commands give us anything else, it's that sense of self and social criticism, of recognizing yourself before you can point the finger. And again, I think that there's, so we have kind of the fragments, the remnants of this moral landscape, both because of our country's history and past and kind of memory, but also because of this innate natural sense of conscience that God has imprinted in the human soul. And I think the segue I wanted to make tonight, just in the interest of time, is that we often read the 10 Commands, or I read the 10 Commands, and I think of them as a very distant thing for this ancient Hebrew people, and maybe they have a role in making me, feel sorry for my sins and confess and be forgiven through the grace of Jesus Christ given to me. But I don't see them as a very vital, part of my life, other than this kind of general hazy moral framework. And I think we as the church do ourselves a great disservice when we forget that we ourselves are inheritors of this divine decalogue, of this expression of the divine will, and that when God brought Israel out of Egypt and gave them his will expressed in these words, he was intending to form a nation, to form a people, and he wanted to establish his rule in their hearts and in their community through his word, through these 10 words, and that we are inheritors of that through the word Jesus and the Spirit bringing the law home and writing it on the tablets of our hearts. And that I think one of the greatest confusions that we have as the church is that we don't see ourselves in the lineage of Israel. We don't understand ourselves as a kingdom people. We don't understand when Jesus said the kingdom of God is here and at hand. We don't understand when the central tenet of profession in the Catechism, in the Apostles' Creed, is Jesus is Lord, Kyrios Jesu. That claim that Jesus is Lord is like a politically charged claim. That's why, you ever stop and wonder, why did Herod want to wipe Jesus out? Why were early Christians being killed for not worshiping the emperor? Because the whole landscape of the confession that Jesus is Lord is to identify him as Israel's God and King in this kind of theocratic monarchy that we find in the Old Testament, but also to call him Kyrios is related to the root of where we get Caesar, to call him ruler, master, Lord in this political sense. And I think that it's important for us, as we kind of wrestle with the upshot of the 10 Commandments, is to see that we ourselves are kingdom people, and that our obedience to the will of God, as expressed in these 10 words, is part of the establishment of his righteousness in the world so that he can establish a just society. And that's supposedly the church to a certain imperfect degree. We are that just society. We are the body of Christ, yes. We are the bride. We are the holy temple, but we are citizens. We are citizens of a heavenly city. All the metaphors are deeply political. And I think that we just do ourselves a great disservice when we forget how centrally political our work is as church, as Christians. So I just wanted to highlight a couple things thinking about Jesus as Lord. So bear with me just for a moment. I'm going to hit you with a screen share for a second. Really impressed with this catechism again. Every time I go through it, I get another sort of dose of how deep and beautiful it is. But this opening line, the very first section, says that the catechism's purpose is not just to inspire and stir up our faith in Jesus Christ and our knowledge of him as Savior, but also if we follow the teaching of the catechism, it will help you become a citizen of God's kingdom and be fully involved in the life of mission of his church, the church being the expression of this kingdom citizenship in time. You know, they're riffing on Paul's great claim that our citizenship is in heaven in Philippians 3:20 there. In question 52, what do we mean when we call Jesus Kyrios or Dominus, Lord, in the Apostles' Creed? It means that we acknowledge Jesus's divine authority over the church and all creation, over all societies and their leaders, and over every aspect of our lives, public and private. I surrender my entire life to him and seek to live in a way that pleases him. And I think that one of the real challenges for us is to remember that this citizenship in heaven, this kingdom membership expressed in the little political community called the church, this profession of Jesus as Lord, puts us in a certain tension with any other form of citizenship. That is, this citizenship is so determinative and constitutive of our identity that it puts us in tension with any other form of citizenship. And I was reminded reading or listening to Hauerwas, a great theologian at Duke this week, that he just said that so plainly, said many of us have forgotten that salvation involves making us citizens of a time and space that is in tension with all other forms of citizenship. It may be that I am more American than Christian, and I'm tempted to confuse the Christian we with the American we. And I think what Hauerwas is getting at, that this tension between our true citizenship and this kingdom politic expressed in Christ and in these commands is always necessarily in tension with any earthly citizenship. And I think the tension between the American citizenship and Christian citizenship in this season has me caught between two different kinds of sins. One sin I'll call the sin of despair, and the other sin I'll call the sin of triumphalism. And by that I mean the sin of despair is to cling to our heavenly citizenship as a form of withdrawal and resignation and resentment of any earthly political rule of life. And in this case, it could easily be a kind of anti-establishment or an anti-Americanism. And you can sense the sort of pull potentially there. The other is a kind of sin of triumphalism. And I think that is to align too much the loyalties to Christ in any given earthly politic, and to tend or trend toward whitewashing the sins of that earthly city's past and their manifestation in the present. And I think that what I wanted to do tonight was say just simply what I've been saying to myself, and that is Christian citizens who find ourselves in this tension between earthly and heavenly citizenship, or Christian identity and American identity, ought to really cling to these three kind of practices or habits of the heart, what I'll call being grateful, what I'll call being critical, and what I'll call being hopeful. And in the first case, gratitude. So that, of course, is a dangerous place to start when the accent mark is currently on criticism. But I think that we as Christians are always tempted to the kind of exilic withdrawal from political society, right? You think of the metaphor being Israel and Babylon, or the early church being killed by the Roman Empire, living under Nero. And even in those moments where you find yourself really at odds with the given political arrangement, you still have the voice of Paul, in Romans 13, even as Nero is verging on killing him, he's saying governing authorities are put there by God. There's a role for this kind of rule. There's a place for political authority, no matter how deformed it gets. And then the other kind of temptation, of course, is the triumphal alignment of the heavenly sort of city with any given earthly arrangement. And you can sense that temptation in Christian history with Christendom, whether it's Constantine the emperor in 325 who converts, or Charlemagne in the 10th, 11th century and on through. You get this fusion of earthly and heavenly politics. And I think we have to remember in our own contemporary situation that we as Christians, we cannot fundamentally withdraw and trash all that is present in American democratic life, because we ourselves have been part of this cross-pollination of Christian faith and ideals with democratic political ideals for hundreds of years now. And as Jacques Maritain put it after the Second World War, he says, not only does the democratic state of mind stem from the inspiration of the gospel, but it cannot exist without it. And so it makes these very strong claims that I think are really powerful. And that is, the democratic form of political life is one of the better expression of the Christian understanding of the human person, the human being as dignified, made in the image of God, and therefore worthy of having rights, and those rights being respected, worthy of needing to give their consent to being governed, worthy of participating in the common good, and also that a Christian understanding of neighbor love and even enemy love is at the very core and root of our understanding of neighborliness in pursuing the common good and democracy. And so he tells this lengthy, beautiful intellectual history of how Christian ideals have been part of the formation of democratic life, albeit it's not heaven. Anybody who's lived in a democracy knows it ain't heaven. It's a lot better than the totalitarian regimes that he was escaping from and others were coming out of the Second World War. And so there's this sense of trying to understand, how do you be appreciative and grateful for the earthly political arrangement you find yourself in, even as you criticize its excesses? And Reinhold Niebuhr, American theologian, writing at the same time, talks about how it's not just our dignity that makes democracy a good expression of political life in accordance with Christian faith, but it's actually also our understanding of sin. He says, man's capacity for justice makes democracy possible, but man's inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary. So there's this sense of being, there's this sense in which our understanding of human fallibility and fallenness allows democracy with its checks and balances and notions of consent and respect for rights to actually rein in the excesses of human nature in a helpful way in terms of political governance. And so my inner political theologian was going wild thinking about this today, but I wanted to highlight one other thing before we sort of open it up. One is the sense of gratitude for the cross-pollination of Christian faith with democratic ideals, which is so central to our shared life. Being grateful for it doesn't mean you're not critical of it at the same time. And so that is actually one of the benefits of this understanding of fallible, fallen human nature and democratic life, is that we can actually be self-critical, as Joan was saying, for our failure to live up to our own ideals. And furthermore, this notion of a heavenly kingdom, which is being run by the only just ruler, the truly just ruler, who is the humble King Jesus, gives us a critical vantage point, some leverage by which to judge the excesses and the injustices and dominations and violence of our own earthly political life. And it's in that sense of grateful awareness, but also critical leverage, that we find the possibility that we ourselves ought to remain hopeful as Christians, not because we think the kingdom of God will ever be fully realized in this life, in any given earthly political arrangement, but because we know that his kingdom will come and that the only truly just ruler will bring about justice and it will roll down like waters. And so again, there's that tension of we want to see that happen now, but we also live in this longing expectation for that which is to come. And that frees us in a way. So I just wanted to hammer you with one more slide from the Catechism, and then I will kick it open. It says, so how do you live as citizens in God's kingdom? Question 182 in the Catechism. It says, as a citizen of God's kingdom, I'm called to live in obedience to God's word and will, in loving witness and service to others, and in joyful hope of Christ's return. And it's here that we get our marching orders. Here that we find the most political charter and declaration given in history, and that is to call Jesus Lord. That's to be members of this kingdom and to let that kingdom citizenship live in tension with where we find ourselves in any given earthly citizenship. And it's in that the church finds its marching orders. And I really think that this situation with COVID and now with George Floyd and the civil unrest that's ensuing, it's forcing us to come out of this asking afresh what the church is. What is our mission? Who are we to be on the other side of this? There's a few institutions, a few industries that are being hit hardest by this time of quarantine and now social critique. And I think it's the church is one, education is another, but it's time to really strip back and ask core questions about our purpose and who we are as we bear witness to the world kind of coming out of this. And we are coming out now, and I'm not going to hit you with that long quote. So I know that's a mouthful, but I think it was on my heart to say we are kingdom people. So these 10 words in the Decalogue and Jesus's crystallization of them in his life and teachings and death and resurrection makes us a kingdom people as church, as citizens of a heavenly city, has great ramifications for how we live in the here and the now. And I just wanted to explore that. If anyone has any thoughts, comments, questions about that, go for it.
I have a question, and you can say not for now, but you know how Jamie Smith talks about the liturgies that we embrace in our culture. And we all, I think, understand the importance of responding properly to these commandments. And I guess a question I have, apart from the challenge they bring to my own imagination for how to respond obediently in any given context, are there liturgies beyond what we engage in that you see that the church needs to embrace to honor God's moral commands?
That is the question. I'd love for others to chime in as they feel led. I think our challenge is first to recognize that our life as a church is fundamentally political in this heavenly sense of citizenship, which bears in tension against any earthly form of citizenship. So when we get together every week and talk about a king who became a slave and was obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross, on the electric chair on the fringes of town, and we call that crucified, crushed slave our king, our Lord, that is fundamentally political. So it's this idea that you've made that crucified slave your president. So how does what does that mean for any other president you might have in your life? And I think that when we go and we feast upon his broken body and his blood as a way of receiving and reminding ourselves of the forgiveness of sins, and also receiving our marching orders to go out humbly in the way he did and lay down our lives for others. These are fundamentally political, and by political, I don't mean ballot boxes, but I mean the sense of communal order and organization and governance that give us our marching orders. So whether or not that means you're a leader in Salem, or you're a mom or a dad at home, learning how to humbly pour out your life for your kids, or a teacher, or someone who's caring for the elderly and the dying, all these things, it's like that shaping of our imagination, that every week we would get back together and say, remember that king who became a slave and gave himself away and died and bled, and we're feeding on him for forgiveness and for our own empowered mission? That is political, you know? I mean, that it's like you have to get it through your head. So then the question is, how does that shape our habits coming out of that in the way that we treat one another? And I think that how does that shape our sense of our kids' imaginations about the world, about the story that they're inheriting and that they're living in? I mean, it's been fascinating to hear Nora describe to our kids the death of George Floyd, the response to it, the understanding of all human beings created in the image of God, the fact we worship a God who became a human being and was crushed by the rulers and those in power and authority in an unjust death on a cross, to start to see the way that their imagination of the world, its wrongs, but also its possible redemption. I think the biggest lie in the world is this, I think. The claim Jesus is Lord, whenever you say Jesus is Lord, but that's my personal opinion, that is the crisis of being a modern person. That religion is this private, kind of in your own head, in your own heart, keep it to yourself, doesn't have lots of consequences for how we live out in the world. That's the problem. The challenge of modernity is this idea that Jesus is Lord for me, in my opinion, you know, the afterclause of modernity.
Yeah, in Lyotard's terms, that's how much we have embraced the postmodern notion that the only truth is what I contextualize as truth.
Yeah.
I have, oh dear. So I read a lot of fantasy books just because I like fantasy. One of the nicer series is by Ursula K. Le Guin. She was from Portland, and she wrote was it Earthsea series? It's about an island chain.
Yeah.
But her,
Great stories.
I don't really care about like magic rules. I just like to see it happen. I'm not one that really cares about the rules of magic, but I've always liked her system because her system of the magic that she created was basically there's this one language that dragons speak, and basically if you want to do a magic spell, all you have to do is speak that language, and whatever you say will happen because that language cannot speak lies. So if you say like I am a dragon, you're forced to become a dragon so that you don't lie in that language. And it's such a simple system, and it's so great, and it's been one of my favorites. Just because I think it's a fundamentally, I don't know, Christian magic. That's probably a bad phrase, but and the other thing I've been thinking about was I was teaching an American government class this semester. I just had my last class today, and we were talking about if our government was actually a democracy, which it's a republic with democratic things in it, and the textbook that we were using sort of downplayed democracy and talked about all these horrible things of like basically if you have a democracy, all the bad opinions of bad people will start ruling. And so and they were talking about how our government has monarchical and aristocratic elements in it to balance that, but it's a balance of everyone has a say, but then only some people can interpret that say and put it into law. And that always comes home to me at night when another thing, I teach medieval history, and I show students when I talk about homage, how when you pay someone homage, you kneel down in front of them and put your hands in their lap. And that's where we've gotten this kneeling down, folding our hands like this, is we're putting our hands in God's hands, in his lap. And that has always helped me. I have a bad time thinking of God personally. So to imagine myself putting my hands in between, the pierced, bloody hands has always been very powerful. Not only that these bloody hands are, weak, but the hands of the creator of everything. I don't know. It's a helpful aid.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's so much in there. I think that's one of the benefits of Anglicanism in my own, sort of journey into Anglicanism, is that you learn how to worship and reverence God through your body, through more than just your mind. And one of the hardest things about just having a mental understanding of the Christian faith is that it fundamentally boils down to like just trying to believe things that are really hard to believe. So that's like what Christianity gets reduced to for a lot of people, versus this ongoing formation of your heart through the way you posture your body. Exactly what you're saying, that you learn something when you get down on your knees in front of something or with others. And it's in those moments of vulnerability that you are imaging another form of power, a different kind of community, a different way of being with one another. And it's fundamentally premised on new ways of humility and love in community, because you're all singularly submitted to this Lord, this crucified one you want to put your hands in the lap of. And I think that we can't underestimate how political our time together is as Christians. And then the question becomes, how does that translate into the public square? So what does it mean to bring that kingdom witness, that confession of Jesus as Lord, into our public lives outside of the doors and the walls of the church, and evangelize, in a sense, the public square? And I think that is it's more than just a prayer, as important as prayer breakfasts or passing out tracts are, which they are important. It is a way of bearing witness to the world of another city, of another story that is bigger and longer and more hopeful than the one that we're stuck in this world. And I think one of the things I've been thinking about in COVID that connects with this thought is we actually live our lives in a very harried pace, frantic most of the time, in our discontent, right? So back to the 10 commands and the grasping hand and the craving and the kind of speed of life. And the problem with that speed is it makes the inefficient and the weak things a real bother. It's a real pain to have little kids or to have sick people or aging people in your lives. And so you have to find ways to move them to the fringes or outsource that kind of care. And I think that one of the most powerful ways that we witness to the kingdom politically is that we're people who have all the time in the world because God has given us that time. He's already disrupted time in the incarnation and redeemed time in the death and resurrection, and will bring time to its beautiful completion in the second coming. So what does it mean to live as people who have all the time in the world? I know that sounds insane, although it sounds less insane during quarantine to feel that way. But I think one public / ecclesial liturgy kind of protest that I saw when I was in Colorado. There was a church called International Anglican in Colorado Springs where Nora and I used to go. And the pastor there, who's now the bishop of the Rockies, Ken Ross, they for whatever reason had a huge outreach to people with disabilities in their church, and so they would go to different homes and different communities and houses and bring people every Sunday. And so the first couple rows would be wheelchairs and different people making outbursts, and they would always get to take communion first, and so the whole rest of the church would watch the kind of unruly Eucharistic procession that would go down every Sunday. And it was this profound witness that left a deep impression on me of kingdom values and kingdom time and kingdom matters in the world that don't actually mirror very well our sleek, efficient, fast, powerful, eternally and perpetually young culture. And I think that, again, it's finding those kinds of those shared ways in which you kind of live into the way that the liturgy helps us imagine an alternative political and community reality. So, oh, it's fun to talk about, you guys. I wish we weren't in Zoom. We could have a beer or coffee now and continue the conversation. So glad to be with you. We're back on the 17th. And there's a Google poll that you've seen if you want to drop a question in there. There was a question about church and state, church and world that sort of prompted my thinking in addition to the situation with George Floyd. And I think I'm leaning in this direction of helping us reflect on what is the church and what will the church be coming out of this, and how does the church interface with the world and our mission as citizens of the heavenly city. So that's kind of the trajectory, but I'd love to hear feedback from you all. So thanks for staying late, and peace to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Joe.
Tina, how are you?
Hey, doing pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These eternal summer nights, huh?
Yeah, trying to figure out if we're trying to go to bed early or late these days with the kids. We're
I
slipping.
know. Our kids are on night 2 of the tent in the backyard.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Sounds
You mean sleeping out there?
Yeah, sleeping out there. It was
Oh,
first time was last night, and it was that like first kind of parent letting go. You're like, do coyotes or bandits come through here very often? I don't know, but they're out in the tent. So
that's amazing.
yeah, they go to bed at like 11, and they were up at like 5 making hot chocolate in the house. So
That sounds exciting.
yeah,
Joe, how come you're not out there in the tent?
I know. I wanted to be, but I didn't accept it.
Is that just the girls? It's Og too?
No, Og, I was saying earlier before you hopped on that I think the summer boredom has already hit Og on like day, whatever we're on, 3 or 4, and he's been roped into the Little House on the Prairie playtime. So that's first. I mean, he's never, ever gotten involved in that whole deal. So yeah, he's in it to win it now. He's part of their little tribe. It's sweet.
That's awesome. I saw a
Almanzo.
picture. They've got your girls have the actual little pinafores and Little House outfits. That's crazy. They're too cute.
That was the Etsy birthday present for Maggie. It's like some Amish woman in Ohio makes these for real deal Little House on the Prairie dresses. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so good though. I can't figure out if I want to put the kids to bed before, like down before this or after this though. So I'm kind of in and out. I see the
Oh, I
ladies.
know, yeah.
The ladies are in and out.
Totally.
Little ones.
Wes just keeps getting on a later and later schedule with the light too. So he's like waking up from his nap at dinner and then crazy. This time of the year is like a no sleep zone. I always forget, and then it comes. It's like the light. I mean, it's great. You kind of are invigorated by all the light, but you do get sort of exhausted.
I know. We have no shades in our bedrooms, so we're up with the sun. Thinking about getting some blackout curtains though. Melody.
And what about the birds?
Oh, right.
So noisy in the morning, right?
There's that for sure. Melody, did you just have a birthday? Yeah. You did.
Oh, cool.
20-something still?
Oh, stop it.
I'm serious. I'm wondering.
Yeah.
35.
What is it?
45.
Woohoo!
Nice. Happy B-Day.
Thank you.
That's exciting. We just had an anniversary last week, a couple days ago.
Oh, yeah.
Hit 15 years. Feels like a minute.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that's cool.
I know. Might actually make it.
Did you sit out by a fire with a cocktail or something to celebrate?
John kind of didn't work that day, so we just hung out and visited and, spent a lot of time in the yard and just super casual, hung out. It was nice. No expectations. That's how we like it.
Sounds like a perfect way to celebrate a life together.
Yeah. I got a few things planted. I did leverage it a little bit. He dug a few holes for me.
Gotcha.
How's the summer pace for you guys? Does it feel good to have school done or weird?
Man, it felt like really good to get to it. Friday felt like, And so it still feels like vacation and a relief, but I can feel just right around the corner that the lack of structure is it's a little too much. So I'm kind of trying to get inspired about different things to get the kids into and myself and try to do good things with our time. Such a strange little window trying to figure out, how you re-enter back in with folks and how much. And so we've been pretty isolated. So we're still we're trying to poke our heads out and figure it out. What is this summer going to look like?
Yeah.
Thankful though, the kids they're really pretty happy being at home. Soren, I feel like he could use a little more of something, trying to figure that scene out.
Yeah. Yeah, social life's pretty big deal at that age. That's hard.
Yeah, but he's pretty chill, so it's going good. But really, I'm just trying to figure out, this summer, next school year, it's a wild thing.
It's so hard to plan right now. It's crazy.
Yeah, we're kind of not, but it's a real thing having a summer in front of you with, how it is with little ones. You've got to have a plan.
You guys got any creative ideas for getting out of town yet?
No, we're sticking close. Nothing yet. How about you guys?
We're wondering, like, camping.
Yeah.
Rent an RV or something.
I did ask him last night. So how much is a trailer? Can we just
Like an RV? Yeah.
Something.
Rent it.
Fun.
Yeah, that could be really cool. It seems like it's still confusing if you went very far, who's open, who's not. I don't know.
Yeah, just
But John's been thinking about just even trying to figure out the day type activities that you can do together. Maybe fishing, little fishing. I don't know. We want to figure out the people that know the local stuff. Where's the rope swings and the lakes and the fishing that we can go check out?
Have you guys been up to the Bright Hops little woodland up there?
We haven't. We've got to do that.
It's for real. It's worth an afternoon. And they've got a zip line that could hurt you, and a rope swing that'll get kids hooting. And it's beautiful. There's a couple big cedars, and even a creek that you could jump in and get your feet cooled off. It's worth an afternoon for sure.
And you sign up for an hour at a time by yourself, so your family's the only one tromping around at that time. You don't have to others being there, which is
cool.
Nice.
Yeah, we've got to do that. We haven't been up there.
Yeah, I was talking to Sarah Owen the other night, and she was telling me that their family has these stand-up paddle boards, and I had no idea. They make kinds that you can just keep in the trunk of your car and inflate, so they don't have to be these huge, massive things that you lug around. And they're sturdy enough. Their kids call it the barge, because you can have like one parent on one and two kids sitting in their life vest. So even for my littles, she said.
Oh, wow.
Like Soren could have, Josephine sitting on one side with her, so then you guys could all go out. And in terms of like their older kids being able to be with their peers, on the open water outside, but still able to be around others and enjoy.
Oh, yeah. Really so is that, where do you do that? Like just at the river?
I think they probably go to Rogers Landing.
No, what's the one it's like Tiger 12 Cook's Park?
Oh, is that on the Tualatin River?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That sounds fun.
We went down to Rogers for our, we just had our 12th anniversary, whenever that was, a couple weeks ago, but it was madness down there, man. I've never seen so many people in my life. It was when it was hot, a week and a half ago or whatever. I was just like, whoa, people everywhere. It was wild. I've never seen that many boats lined up, but yeah, people were paddleboarding. I'm like, that river is like the lost treasure. No one really even goes. I mean, usually it's empty, but I'm like, that might be our spot this summer, babe. It's time to get a boat. Rogers Landing.
John is all about a boat. He's been talking about that forever.
Oh, it feels so good. Just power out there.
Yeah. I've got some good memories of water skiing. I think inner tubes is about where I'm at, I think. Fly around on an inner tube. That sounds fun. Didn't they just add on to that? The landing or whatever they added to the river.
Oh.
Somewhere. I'm not.
They did. I mean, they have a huge boat ramp, huge dock, and there's a little swimming area. We went down there, and Wes was wading in the water, and I mean, it's,
it's kind of fun is if you go out Wilsonville Road, maybe 2 or 3 miles east. I feel like I'm cutting out. If you go 2 or 3 miles east, have you ever noticed there's like a little county park on the way to Wilsonville, just outside of Newberg on your right? You can go right past it, but there's a public access. It might be a state park or a county park.
Like a reserve.
Well,
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah, you can pull in and park there for the day, and then there's a few little trails, and it takes you down, and you can get these beautiful little breaks in kind of the cottonwoods and a little private beach, and you can kind of sneak in there and swim, and you could even cast a line.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a nice little spot.
You figured out some spots.
A few. I was going to say also, like, we need like a rec share, kind of the way the Bright Hops have loaned us all their woodland. I mean, the number of people who've told me how like good it's been for them to be up there through all this. But the other thing is, we got a huge destroyer of a canoe, and so if anybody wants that, it's like a 2-3 person canoe that you can just take. It's like indestructible. And And so that's been fun. We did that
Awesome.
with the kiddos, and you can launch at Rogers.
That's cool.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, but I want a boat too.
There's something about those motors down there. You're like, yeah, the motor makes sense.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, can you water ski behind a bass boat? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think so.
Try.
Good job.
I'm gonna go tuck the kids into the tent. You guys, great to be with you.
You
Yeah.
too.
Love y'all.
Hey, guys.
Yeah, good to see your faces.
Yeah.
Friends.
Thank you for our chariot. Like at this point, nobody's actually ridden in it yet, but it's pretty much the hot spot. Anytime we go out into the garage, everybody fights over who can sit in the chariot.
Apparently pretty
Nice.
high right now. I just bought a bike that is going to be here for like 3 months, so we're
There's like a national bike shortage, apparently.
I've heard of that.
Yeah.
I know.
We-
We were smart enough at the beginning. That was the one thing we got on top of. No toilet paper or anything, but like get the bike squared away. I was actually on that one. It's about all we prepped for.
we're staying kind of physically distant through the summer too, and trying to figure out creative and good ways of engaging our community, and for our kids' sake to have something good and hopeful every day that still fits within what we're doing. So we're in it with
Yeah. Yeah. I know. Well, we should just try a walk or like a bike ride down our road one of these days or evenings,
Build a fire.
or a fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got a pretty good front yard. We've been trying to think of, there's a lot of, cornhole and badminton. Just need to figure out the things that we can do outside, and have a hand washing station. And it is hard with the kids though. It's like, how do you keep them, or do you keep them? It's a tricky one. We're kind of thinking even like maybe we can put up a little area, almost like a cute little, garden fence or something, just to kind of indicate where the kids can sit on opposite sides. I'm not sure, but I think we're kind of accepting that this might be going on for a little while.
Yeah.
I think that's the right way, because it seems like the two extremes are actually a bit easier. The one extreme of like wishing it all away and pretending like, forget about it. I'm just gonna, be cavalier about this. But it could be easy. I could see us just being like, it's so much effort to dance in the middle. We're just gonna keep doing the quarantine thing. But no, it feels right, though it's funky to be in that more kind of middle space of like, all right, we're gonna get out there, but everything's gonna be weird. And we're part of a garden group on Sunday nights that we've been part of for like 5 years, where we just go and garden, and usually we would have a potluck afterwards. Well, this year, and again, the people at the garden, you have the 30 people there. People are all along a spectrum in terms of concern on this. So we've been 2 weeks so far, and both weeks is just this weird, awkward dance of like,
Yeah.
how are we navigating kids? And
Yeah.
How
I
far
know it's,
do you think 6 feet is? Because some people think 2 feet apart is actually 6 feet apart.
yeah, like people are saying
yeah.
physical distancing like this to me. I'm like, that's not helping.
Yeah. I know it's tricky. I can tell we've kind of just kept our heads down and not over process too much. But now, as we kind of realize it's going to be going on for a while, and with kids and the ages, we need to figure out how to enter in. I think what you're saying too, on some level, we can't just stay tucked away for, a year or 2 or 4 or whatever. So seems like it's time to accept that it's going to be a certain amount of risk with every interaction. But it seems, as moms are starting to get together, it's tricky, because it seems like everybody's ready to, we just want the kids to feel normal, That's what I'm noticing. Is I'm thinking, well, what about the middle where we try to get together, but we have it make sense? We try to actually, shoot for not passing anything along, shoot for the distance, maybe even ask the kids to wear cloth masks when they're close. That's the part that's tricky to me. I would like to enter in, but kind of doing what we can instead of just kind of throwing our hands up and just, going all in. So I'm trying to figure that out because it doesn't quite feel natural. It seems like with kids, you kind of have to decide if you're doing one or the other. But yeah, so I'm still trying to figure out, no, how could we? How can we try to do it smart, even though it might be awkward, or I don't know. It seems like what we need to teach our kids at this point, because it's part of life. They need to, I don't know. It's like wearing seat belts. We all just kind of have to accept that there's a risk, but you can do what you can do and then just move forward.
Right. Yeah, maybe you guys have discovered this, but it seems to me that most families are in that space. Like I think the extremes are less common. Most folks are kind of like navigating this strange middle, and with a few exceptions, my folks called us last night and they were saying, hey, we want to come up and see you guys. And I have an older brother in Wilsonville. And, they're like, yeah, we're going to come up and we're going to see you guys. We're going to see your brother. We're going to stay with your niece and nephew. Your brother and Liz, they're going to go to New York and we're going to stay and watch them with the kids. And I was like, New York?
In the fall, by the way.
They're going to New York? I was like, could he not get tickets to Wuhan?
Yeah. Is this your folks?
Yeah, this is my folks. We're going to are planning to come up and watch my brother's kids while he goes to Manhattan for a conference vacation. So I'm like, I got to call my brother. What is he talking about?
No.
Oh man, I know some people are all in. I feel like our parents' generation, they're super brave. I feel like almost the older you are, the more they're just like, brave.
Totally.
Yeah, and it is easier, I think, as adults. Like I've still been going to book club and hanging out with a friend on the porch and whatnot, but that's easy to do as an adult. Even if my whole book club, they're all sitting real close together, I can sit myself 6 feet back and wear a mask and whatnot. It's just harder with 3 littles, like that sweet little one you got there. So
I missed that last little bit. You can do it, but I'm gonna do it in 2 minutes. You guys can't do that, okay? I know. I'm gonna do it though. Yeah. Did you say you've been just the idea that it's easy enough to get together with us as grown-ups, but the kids, is that what you were saying?
Yeah, like Cade's birthday is next week, and I was trying to figure out a way to let him have like some kind of time with friends that he misses.
Yeah.
The best I could come up with was this like super controlled environment. His 2 friends from preschool that he wanted to see, their families are like, throw caution to the wind. One of them thinks it's all a hoax. You know, definitely not kind of doing the distancing that we are. But for our sake and for the sake of the friendship of the boys, they were willing to kind of go along with what I suggested, which is like we'd be out in the front yard on my driveway. I'd have 3 different tables 6 feet apart. Everyone would have their own set of Legos, and it would be just the 3 boys. So Sean would have the 2 girls, so I don't have to worry about them running around. I mean, it's a super controlled thing, which, I could do that once or twice a week for each kid.
Mm-hmm.
But it's when I think about, like you, kind of the long-term vision of how do we as a family do these things and how arduous and demanding and what are we asking of the people in our community. Yeah, when I try to think too far ahead about can I really keep something like that up, I just come back to what am I doing today? Because It can be so overwhelming.
Yeah, totally. I know, it's just, it does. It feels like it's a jump in time. However you're going to do it. It's interesting to kind of have it figure out how to take shape.
Have you guys done much like over the years, like kind of daddy daughter dates, like one, just going one at a time, taking one of them to a movie or to ice cream? Has that been part of your guys' routine?
That is one of those things that's always, what we aspire to do.
Yeah.
That's always been something we've talked about. And I say we've pulled off a handful of them for sure over the years, some good ones, but not nearly enough.
Yeah.
Same here.
Same here. We don't do it much. Every time we do, we come back looking at each other and we're just like, you wouldn't believe what that little kid is like when they have a chance to speak, and the other ones don't.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if
Yeah.
this summer a little bit, maybe because it's easier to wrangle one with like a friend's parent, and it's like, one kid, one parent.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if maybe that's a way forward for us, is like kind of getting rid of the zone defense and just going man on man for a little bit.
Yeah, I know. I think so too. Kind of, yeah, even just mentoring seems like a really good time, even just for very intentional time together, where you can really kind of, I've been thinking of that too for Soren, thinking both ways, youngers, and really been trying to think of older influences too that, anyway, I agree. Partnering off and finding intentional things.
Yeah.
Book clubs, maybe even book clubs to do father and son, or,
Maybe fishing.
We can bring books with us while we fish.
Maybe to sit on. Yeah.
Karaoke. I've even thought maybe outside karaoke, we should build a stage.
Marianne, Mel's gonna go say hi to Marianne. She's dropping something
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. Good night.
She and Steve are moving in like a week. Did you guys get a chance to meet them at all?
Yeah, but I don't really know where they're moving or much.
Yeah. They're heading to Florida, of all places, and I think they leave in like a week. So it's happening.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Crazy time to move.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, John, we didn't circle back to it, but it would be.
I'm gonna say goodnight too.
All right, night, Tina.
I'll catch you next time. Yeah.
Hey, it would be fun to try. I was telling you about Hag Lake is pretty close.
Yeah.
Let's.
Is
Is a weekend best, or could you swing a weekday ever?
I could totally swing a weekday. I like going to places when it's the off day, right?
Yeah, man, me too.
Yeah. So yeah, let's do it. I just need to. I'll get my fishing license, and Soren. Does Soren need a fishing license? Being 13. I don't know. I know your son probably doesn't need one, but I think Soren probably does. So yeah, I'll get those squared away so I can go, because that sounds good.
Yeah. And I wonder, to Tina's point, does it make sense? I mean, I think Soren is certainly, that's pretty easy for him to kind of be with other kids his age. I'm thinking in terms of the distancing thing, Cade is probably as young as you'd want to go. Do we like throw it out to a few more folks and see if we can't pull off a little team?
Yeah, definitely. As far as whatever you think the side of the lake can handle, as far as how many guys,
That's yeah. Yeah, so I've fished there a couple times. I wish I knew it better and could kind of like, if I had like a spot in mind where I'm like, oh yeah, like this spot, there's a big shoreline, and yeah, maybe first crack we go a little smaller,
Yeah.
and then work our way up.
Yeah, grab Joe and Augie or something, and just maybe just the three of us go and see what it's like.
Yeah,
Joe will catch something, I'm sure. And
there we go. There we go. We need a ringer. Yeah, man. I think that would be great.
yeah, sounds good. So yeah, I'll get on that, and like as soon as we want to do it, next week would work for me. I think yeah, any day except for Thursday, I'm good.
Okay. Next week might be a bit tricky, although Saturday would work, but I think you're right. I think we want to avoid Saturday. Yeah, let me give you a couple specific days.
Okay.
Mel works Tuesday, Thursday. So then I just got to land on one of the other ones, Monday, Wednesday, or Friday.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Just shoot me a text or give me a call. Get it going.
Sounds good, man. Have a good one, dude. Enjoy a 10 p.m. sunset, it looks like.
Yeah, it's going down. We'll have to have you guys over here too. I think, we could build a fire too. I think that we could do a social distance thing at some point.
Yeah, man. We're right there with you guys as I'm listening. Like, we're kind of in that same space of like, all right, we think it's time to start dipping into these things. So it'll be awkward together.
Have you guys like got your own little personal? You see on the TV, everyone's got their custom face mask. What are you guys rocking?
I go like straight surgical, paper disposable, man. I go one at a time and then throw that thing away.
Nice.
But then no, somebody, maybe it was Carol Terry. Somebody made a few, so I got a couple denim style, kind of blue, and they look classy. Like just go. They match with anything.
Cool. Yeah, I have like some old N95s that I got like a long time ago, and I just like they're filthy. They've been through the chicken coop and the barn cleaning, so I just keep reusing them.
What's good about that is when people see you coming, like they're physical distancing because they're like,
yeah, that's right. Cool, Sean. Well, have a good night. I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
See you, John.
All right. Bye.
Bye.